Okay, so so one of the things that really bugs me is when people say something like this. They'll say, "How did Laban, or no, how did Nephi take Laban's clothes off after he killed him?" Right?
Sure.
And they're like, "Because you got to get the blood off, and how do you put it on?" And I'm like, "Well, obviously he took the clothes off before he killed them. Like that's the only logical explanation, right?"
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. I think things like that sort of bother me, not because they're not important to talk about, but
Hmm.
because for me, uh, the purpose of the Book of Mormon is it's a text that tells me how to live my life.
Yeah.
Um, and
Right.
I'm
Exactly.
totally cool with imperfections in it too, or things not appearing to make sense as well.
Well, yeah. Well, I think like it's like like let's say you read Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
And what I love about Harry Potter is like J.K. Rowling like takes the time to like describe the goblets and the plates at Hogwarts and like every little thing, but like with such a condensed text, that covers 600 years of, or 1,000 years of, more than that, right? Several thousand
Around,
years of.
yeah, around 1,000. I did calculate it one time. I think it's like just over 1,000 years.
Yeah, it's like you don't have time to describe every detail, like, and like like Monet, and like repaint the picture for you. But it's like obviously Nephi was having a mental, like spiritual, almost like debate. And then is like, well, how should I go about this? And he's like, well, I'm gonna do this. And then you think he'd have time to like, okay, so I'm gonna kill this guy. So I should probably make preparations to kill the guy and then take his clothes and
Oh,
put it
sure.
on. Yeah. So it's not like he like did it, and it only takes what, like 3 verses for Nephi to kill him. But like,
I think so.
yeah, so you read that in 15 seconds, but it took the guy probably like maybe a half hour to think about it or something, maybe longer, let's say, right?
Yeah,
So,
no, that's definitely true. You're not the first one to bring this up with me. Like this particular moment up with me too.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I was on a podcast not too long ago where someone brought up the same moment. I don't think it actually got put in the podcast though.
oh
Um,
interesting,
but
yeah.
it's one of those things where, there's a lot about the Book of Mormon that is explained in the text itself, but then there's a lot in there that the
Hmm.
authors were at liberty to
Yeah.
say, and they didn't say, right? I think it's interesting to ask, what didn't get included, and a lot of things like that are thought processes and
Yeah.
the motivations, right? And
Hmm.
we all have a worldview from which we speak and a worldview from which
Yeah.
we write, and they do too. They're not somehow exceptional from that.
Yeah, for sure. I think like when you read First Nephi, I think it's very clear. Well, obviously, it's very clear that Nephi is writing it from the like he's in retrospect, he's writing it, and then also like he has a motivation too. It's like he's now the king of the Nephites, and so like that's going to inform the narrative. And you could be all cynical about it and be like, well, it's just there to prop up his kingship, but also it's like you have to explain why Nephi's in that position and um why he's writing it, and then like what's his goal, like with doing that. So yeah, like it's that's gonna filter the way that he writes about his experiences with his brothers and with his interaction with the Lord. And I think that's perfectly like it like that's an insight into like his world and into like what the text is trying to do. And I think it's like, yeah, like it comes with the territory. I think it's fantastic information.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I want to say too is that I think we approach scripture like it's scientific history too often.
Hmm.
So the idea of scientific history is this idea that every single event described in a text had to happen literally. But
Hmm.
that's not what I think history has meant for most people over time. History has been, when people record their histories, right? They record their thoughts, their impressions, they record things filtered through their worldview. They record
Hmm.
what they think is the primary objectives of life, which often include things like struggles between different groups, and how that impacts their life. And with that said, too, I think we expect the text to be so precise when that's not the point of
Hmm.
it. And there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be
Yeah.
like, and not just mistakes, but also incorrect descriptions and incorrect ways of thinking about things. But that's true of any sort of religious
Yeah.
text either, too.
Yeah. I think again, it's like people kind of read the text with like I don't want to sound rude, but it's like it's not the most sophisticated way. Like when Joseph Smith says it's the most perfect book, or the most, is that what he said? The most perfect book. Um
Yeah, if it's the most correct book, that's what he
oh
said.
yeah, thank you. The most correct book. Yeah. It's like it's like so then he doesn't say it's the most perfect book, right? The most correct book like has a wiggle room for it for there to be incorrect.
If there be
Right.
imperfections, they be of man, which would necessitate that there be imperfections.
Yeah, exactly. So I know it's like people like ignore that part or something. But I think I think that touches on a subject that I want to touch on a bit later. But first, let's start with you. So Hannah, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I'm so glad we get to hear your perspective, because it's always great. And I always feels like it's like the sunlight that's needed for some dark stuff that's going on. And
Oh, thank you. That's so
so
kind.
yeah, of course. No, it's always great to hear your thoughts on things. So, tell me a little bit about you, just like a quick snapshot of introduction of who you are, and then we'll talk about the Book of Mormon and how it's affected you.
Sounds good. So my name's Hannah. I come from the East Coast. I currently live in Utah. I come from a very Catholic background. Um, I was baptized Catholic as a baby. My family was Catholic. I joined the church. My conversion story is way too long to share, but I still have a deep love of Catholicism too. I moved out to Utah to go to BYU. After I did a year at a Catholic college, College of the Holy Cross. I graduated with a bachelor's degree from BYU, and I'm about to graduate with a master's degree from BYU. And I've worked doing usually some type of either ancient scripture or church history research and TA-ships since I've been at BYU.
That's so awesome, and congratulations on almost graduating. I one day will be there.
It's
Yeah.
a great day. I graduated in the pandemic from
Oh
undergrad, so
yeah,
I felt like I didn't actually have a real
for sure.
graduation.
Yeah, my wife feels the same way. She's like, darn it. And then she also had a trip to Belize planned. And so that had to get canceled. So that kind of sucked.
That's
But
rough.
yeah. No, that's way cool. So what's your master in? It's in ancient Middle Eastern, or what's it in?
So so the title of the program is comparative studies.
Oh, okay.
But what I have taken classes in, I've done Greek New Testament. I've done some classical literature courses. I've actually done some 19th century literature courses too, but that's sort of beside the point. And then I'm bringing in my Hebrew and my Coptic as well for my thesis. So
That's
it's been
awesome.
a ancient studies adventure, I like to say.
Did you read the Gnostics as well?
Yeah, I've read some of the Gnostics. I took a Coptic. I've taken a couple Coptic classes actually.
Cool.
So I've read like Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Thomas, Apocryphon of
Great.
John, that sort of stuff.
That's way awesome. That's so cool. Well, awesome. I'm so excited to speak with you today. Again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's
Um,
so fun.
so yeah, so I guess you were raised Catholic, and then you converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Tell me about that process. Like, not I know it's too long, but specifically tell me about like your relationship with the Book of Mormon. What what was that? What was it like reading that text? And you're such a brilliant person. I mean, I can't imagine you. Well, you tell the story. I want to hear it from you.
Oh, sure. So reading the Book of Mormon was a really complicated process for me. I had read parts of the Book of Mormon when I was in middle school and high school, especially when it was brought up in American history classes, and I didn't really see myself as taking it seriously though. It was sort of a something that I knew I had done, but I didn't feel like there was any sort of internal impact for me. And then my freshman year of college was when I started being a lot more religiously curious. I've always considered myself religiously curious, I've enjoyed being able to experience other traditions, and be able to read other tradition scriptures too. And so when I was a freshman, I decided, okay, I think I want to be Catholic. And part of that was because everyone in my family had been Catholic, but also when I had the ability to make that choice on my own. My parents are divorced, so that definitely impacted it. But when I had the ability to make that choice on my own and to consider whether or not I wanted to be religious at all, I found so much beauty in Catholic liturgical services. At the same time, I wanted to really try to understand why I was picking Catholicism over other religions. And when I read the Book of Mormon all the way through, that was during my freshman year. And my relationship with it was really complicated. I at the same time was reading a lot about the historicity of the Book of Mormon, a lot about the geography of the Book of Mormon, and reading from both critical sides and sides that believe in some varying levels of historicity, right? And I had come to the conclusion that I didn't think that the book was historical while I was reading the book, and
Okay, very
that did,
interesting.
yeah, that did impact the way that I read it too. And I started seeing it, and I was like, okay, this doesn't feel plausible to me. And then I had a really interesting spiritual experience where I was praying in St. Joseph's Chapel, and I was asking God, I don't know where you want me to go, and I'm going to need you to make it clear to me. And then the next morning, I read the Book of Mormon again. I read from Moroni 7, and I read Moroni
Oh,
7,
cool.
verse 41. And in that moment, after I read that verse, I realized that my whole paradigm needed to shift. My paradigm was set on this idea of what historical facts support my faith, but I realized that my religion had to be more experiential, and that my experiences and my ideas that came from reading were not less valid of information or less valid of evidence for the direction of my life. So
Very cool.
it was really reading about charity in the Book of Mormon that
Mhm.
I think shaped the way that I see the text.
No, that's so interesting. I'm taking Terrell Gibbons' course right now. On the catalog, it's called, English 357, Ethics and Values in Literature. But he calls it the intellectual history of doubt. Um, in Western, in the West. And so we're talking about how people have lost faith in sort of Christianity in the West, in Europe. And so we read a lot of poetry, a lot of philosophy. And Terrell, of course, is like a big fan of romanticism. That's like his thing, which is great. I mean, I love romanticism. I have some
I
problems with
happen
it.
to love romanticism.
Yeah, I think it's like it makes the world bigger and more like beautiful, I think, but and more dramatic, and more heroic. I just love it. So, but one of the things that Terrell kind of argues, and that I think comes from like the romanticism, is like it's like it's like the experience you have, like the what's the word, the intensity of experience, like when you see like roses, in the morning dew, and like the intensity of experience itself, like gets, it's like that's what gets you in touch with reality, and when I think about the gospel and charity and like love, and the type of love, it's like it's the love that makes the other human, that makes them a person, and that makes them like real to you. And that's like what it's like, that's why everyone's worthy of forgiveness, is because like it's like when you see that person's face, it like shines through to you, and that's what it's like, that feeling that you get is like that's real, and you can't like explain it away. um does that make sense what I'm saying? I hope I am, but
No, that does make sense, and I think you're definitely right. For me, I I have a little less patience for trying to live my life solely based on um, these ideas of of strict empiricism. And I'm going to couch this very significantly.
Sure.
I believe empiricism is really great and fantastic. And I was out there arguing for vaccinations and masks for all of COVID-19. I continue to do so. So I'm not one to just say, my feelings and discount
Sure.
the data. But I also do think that, at least in terms of my religious experience, a lot of it is profoundly emotional in a way that I can't suggest is not real, and I can't suggest is
Mm.
not part of me, and doesn't move me. And because of that, I think that I can comprehend infinity in those instances. I can comprehend eternity, even if it's just for a small moment, and that
Right.
to me is much more meaningful than some type of you know proposition that I'm told that I need to believe in.
Oh,
I
for
think
sure.
propositions fail,
Yeah.
and that charity that you experience, that relationship that you experience, is what persists.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, when I think about Joseph Smith's first vision, like that experience, it's like it's like it's an experience, right? Joseph Smith is like praying, and he's not just thinking about this in his mind, but he went out and he actually like did something and prayed vocally, and then like God and Jesus Christ come up, appeared to him. It's like this super intense experience, and then they like call him by name, so there's an emotional
Mm.
connection there. And then they say to him like it's the creedal aspect of Christianity that's an abomination to me. um and to me that's like, oh yeah, it's like reducing religion to like propositional assertions is like the not right. Like that's, you've missed the mark, big time, big league. So that's it.
Sure. And I will say that I think most people of other faiths don't really reduce religion to propositional assertions. But I do think that there is some danger that
Mhm.
happens, and that's when we miss the mark, is when we're trying to be so strict and
Mhm.
legalistic with our ways of speaking about the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is not strict or legalistic at all.
Yeah, no, totally. So I was gonna surprise you, but I think I'm gonna just let you know now that we're talking about empiricism. I did invite Terry to this podcast. I'm just kidding.
Oh, that would have been so funny. You did get me there for a second. I was like, oh no.
I'm just kidding around. Maybe next time. Maybe I'll get him on next time. But um yeah, no, I mean I agree with you. I think I think I don't think we should be discounting like the emotional and the experiential and the participatory aspects of religion. And I think you are correct that not everyone reduces religion to that. But I think as people, when it comes down to like defending the faith or defending um religion, it's like people they want to do it in a in a they want to use like a set of syllogisms to do it, and here's
Well,
my
and
argument.
the funny part is I saw myself as someone who did that, right? So
Yeah.
I think definitely in 2020 especially, I was super hyper focused on a religious defense, and at the time I was also uh pretty orthodox, like as orthodox as they come, and also pretty
Mhm.
conservative. And I mean, we said earlier that we were going to talk about this a little bit, but
Yeah.
I will say that it was reading the text of Book of Mormon, specifically Fourth Nephi and Mosiah 2 through 5, that caused a massive paradigm shift for me, where
Mhm.
I sort of let go of my conception of orthodoxy, and let go of my conception of like a political paradigm. And that was interesting for me because when I read the text of the Book of Mormon, and I really considered what comes from it, I just kept seeing that the Book of Mormon in my mind, tells me what I need to be doing to help other people realize justice, realize fairness, realize equity. And it's a very charitable approach to things. And of course, that has made me more liberal, and I haven't tried to hide it. I don't think it's
Sure.
necessarily bad.
No, no, no.
But I do see so much of, and I'm going to use this term carefully, social justice
Sure.
in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, that is a tricky word. But when I think about my experience too, in 2016, I voted for Donald Trump. I was very much
Okay.
in the conservative camp. But then as I've deepened my understanding of the Book of Mormon and the scriptures in general, I have like abandoned, like, or I've stepped further, like, to the center. I wouldn't say I wouldn't consider myself like a liberal necessarily, but like I'm sure there are a lot of people that would consider me a liberal. But yeah, I think the big win here is like I've abandoned like this rigid sort of ideology. Um,
Sure. And I needed to abandon a rigid conservative and orthodox ideology too, right? So I do
mhm,
understand that. And I don't think everyone has to necessarily end up on the left. I think
mhm,
moderation is fantastic. But a big
yeah,
part of this for me is worldview, right? And when I feel like I've had a more gospel centric worldview, I've viewed interactions in terms of the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25.
mhm,
And I've seen how the text of the Book of Mormon explicitly supports that idea that the most important things that we can be doing are giving to the poor, are making sure that we bear each other's burdens, that we mourn with others. And
yeah,
it's not so much about defending uh propositions or
yeah.
convincing people of the truthfulness of a principle so much as it is about just showing them God's love. And for me, that's a much healthier way to live my life.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, I totally agree. I think, I mean, one, like, actions speak louder than words every time. Um, and then also, like, I think, the values that are conveyed in the Book of Mormon about mourning with those who stand in need of mourning, and being a witness of Christ, like that speaks to me a lot more than an argument. And then also, I mean, going back to Moroni, and those late, those chapters there, it's like, um, I think Terrell pointed this out, in class, among, Catholic and Protestant denominations, children were born into sin, and then also, just at the time, a lot of children didn't live past 5 years old or something like that. So you didn't really like develop a relationship with them until they started kind of talking. At least, I mean, with mothers, it's like more immediate, but with fathers, it's kind of more delayed. But the Book of Mormon sort of disrupts that and says, no, like, children are precious, and they're saved, and they should be viewed with value rather than like being a product of some original sin, and to me that kind of speaks again to like that idea of experiencing life. Like when you hold a newborn, it's like you don't automatically think like this is a sack of sin here. You're like, this is a
Sure.
precious baby. It's like my blood, and I want the best for it. Like how, and that's like the Book of Mormon for sure confirms that, and like our theology confirms that, like, yeah, like, this is a heritage of the Lord and all that. So I think it's really beautiful what the Book of Mormon is doing for especially, Christianity, against the background of what else is going on, with the other denominations. I mean, that's one thing I have to work on, is like I want to talk about the Book of Mormon without insulting other faiths, but
I actually find so much beauty in other faiths. And I think it's because I've tried to experience them that that's been the case. I am
mhm,
more or less a universalist
yeah,
in terms of salvation, right?
right,
So I think that gives me a lot of freedom to be able to see churches in a positive light, as I see religions as trying to bring people back home to God. And that's a persistent thought that I have when I look at
Mhm.
other faiths, and I don't see them through the lens of, here's all of the things that I think they're wrong on. It's
Mhm.
more that I just see them as good people trying to figure it out, just like I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But I get that that is a
Well,
particular worldview.
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, to a certain degree, I agree with you there. Like, I think the Doctrine and Covenants in the Book of Mormon, like, really make it easy for Mormons to say, like, yes, let's draw from the best of all traditions and from the best of different books and different trains of thoughts, and if it's truth, then we we're it's on our side. We're a part of truth. We're aligned with that. And so that for me, like, does help me view other religions in a positive light. Um, but like, I mean, I'm just I like to debate people online. I'm kind of
Oh,
contentious, so
sure.
so I'm always like, yeah, but the Mormons have an edge on this, and that's just a personal flaw of mine. Um, but yeah, but again, it's like it's because of our scripture that like allows me to like take a broader look at religious traditions and different trains of thought and see if is this truthful. It's worth evaluating at the very least, and then praising what's praiseworthy. Um so yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful for like for our scripture and our faith that like allows me to have that worldview. So
Oh,
okay,
definitely. Same
so
here.
I think we drifted a little further. So historicity and like the propositional was kind of like where you were at, but then you kind of like shifted away from that after reading Moroni. Then what kind of happened?
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. This is so at this point I'm a Latter-day Saint. I'm at BYU, and I'm starting to explore what other people, what other Mormons or other Latter-day Saints say about the text of the Book of Mormon. And this is when I stumbled upon the Heartlanders. And um, the Heartlanders are a group of people who are in the mainstream Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They're not technically Mormon fundamentalists, but I'd argue that they do have a fundamentalist approach to scripture. I stumbled upon them, and that really, I don't know if I've ever been so fired up to write about particular interpretations of scripture, but it was primarily because I saw it as diametrically opposed to the gospel that I knew. So at this point, right?
I
So this is
mean,
2020.
isn't
Oh,
this
go ahead.
also just diametrically opposed to statements made by Joseph Smith and other general authorities and kind of like the leading research right
I think
now?
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. So
Okay, so
yeah, so
keep going.
this was 2020, and in 2020 I was like, known as sort of a firebrand conservative online. And I will say I have apologized for a lot of that, and my apologies are sincere.
I can't imagine you being firebrand anything. Like you're so kind.
Oh, thank
Like
you.
when I think
I
firebrand, I think like Westboro Baptist Church.
I think
Like you're not them.
I was not the Westboro Baptist Church. I did think I had things, attitudes to repent of, and
Sure.
approaches to change, right? And I think that's true for everyone. So I was going through this transition in my life where I was going from, I think, what was a naive faith to a more mature faith, while I was studying the Heartlanders. And this is when I started getting really passionate about immigration. So the church had put out a statement, I think it was in 2020, about immigration, and I was at that point like pretty conservative, just like your typical very annoying libertarian conservative that
Sure.
like is, yeah. And so I was like, oh, everyone that I listen to politically says that you know we should restrict immigration to just be like these particular things, but we should still allow immigrants. And I went back to the scriptures, and I walked away that day thinking, oh no, nope, we have to welcome everyone. And that's
Yeah.
been my default position. I am very there are a few issues that I'm very passionate about, but I 100% believe that we have a Christian impetus and obligation to welcome the foreigner. And I
Mhm.
saw the Heartland movement um,
Oh yeah.
as diametrically opposed to that facet
Mm.
because
Yeah, I
they
can see how that's
they've
problematic in all sorts of ways.
yeah, they've stated a lot of things about immigration policy in the United States that I've been like, oh my goodness, like we should not say that at all. That's terrible.
Yeah, well, okay, no, so let me bring this back to the Book of
Yeah,
Mormon a little
sorry.
bit, because I think
Sure,
there's a good case to make, right? And not a
sure,
political case, but I think like a spiritual case to be made. Okay, so
sure.
so there's a term called domicide. It's a new phrase, a new word. It was only coined back in like 2017, so it's pretty new. But domicide, like the word homicide, means like homicide means to kill a person, right? Domicide, it comes from the root domos, which means home, and so domicide means to destroy one's home. And so domicide occurs in all sorts of places throughout history. A really good example is after Alexander the Great took over the world, and then he passed away, and then that sort of split into four different kingdoms, and then they all warred against each other. That's domicide for sure, because Alexander like took his campaigns through all of the known world, and people lost their homes, they were burned to the ground. So in the Book of Mormon, domicide happens all the time. People have to flee their homes are destroyed, they have to flee persecution. There's wars that erupt all the time, and people's homes are being destroyed left and right. um, and I see these, and from the first page of the book, like from the first chapter, it's like it introduces the fact that people are immigrating from place to another place, and that persists throughout the whole narrative. And then, you enter the Jaredites, and they have immigrated too, um, and so there's like, I think you're right. Like there's a component to the narrative that's saying, we have to take, we can't look at foreigners as just others. They're not just others.
Yeah,
They're a
they're part
remnant
of the
of the
human
tree, right?
family of God.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. They're right. They're grafted into the tree. So yeah, so yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I think that's very important, because people's sense of home and people's sense of home informs their worldview. And I'm even from just taking this from a domicide perspective. The reason that the Heartlanders are arguing the Heartland thing is because they're trying to get the world around them to conform, or they're trying to push back against the idea that their home is being somehow changed and destroyed. So, because people who let's say are not so welcoming towards immigrants will say no, they're going to come in and they're going to change the culture, and they're going to change the way that our country looks and how my home looks. They're going to take all the jobs, or whatever the case is, right? Like their home is
sure.
going to be um, changed in some radical way. And so to push against that, the Heartland model kind of feels like it reaffirms that home is here, and and it's the birthplace of my religion, and so it kind of like it helps to keep their worldview intact. But again, it's on kind of on shaky grounds. But it's important, I think, to sympathize with the Heartland people. I think they're feeling that their sense of home is being threatened somehow, some way. And so, I think home is important, and to immigrants, who have to leave their home, like home is important. So in the Book of Mormon, you get that the domicide. It's all throughout the text.
One of the things that I think I want to say is about worldview again, right? So my central issue with the Heartlanders is that their theoretical reading of the Book of Mormon, I would argue, is from a Christian nationalist lens that incorporates Calvinist ideas, rather than from the lens a theoretical approach that I think is healthy, right? Because I'm very anti-nationalist. I think nationalism is very bad. But when you're reading a religious text, you do have to have a theoretical approach to it, because everyone does. Everyone has a worldview. Everyone has a way that they read a text, right? And
Yeah,
I would argue that the best way to read the Book of Mormon is through the lens of how can I love God and how can I love my neighbor. And then once you read it
right.
through that lens, I think you subvert a lot of the issues that people have with the Book of Mormon, and you're able to see that the imperfections in the book are not things that you are beholden to. You are beholden
Hmm.
to the idea that all are like unto God, whether black or white, whether bond or free, right?
Hmm.
Like that's that verse.
For sure.
And you're beholden to the equality of all people, and you're beholden to the inherent worth of all people. And because you're beholden to that inherent worth, that means you have to have charity for them. And if you have charity for them, that means you have to welcome them.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Totally.
I just argue that their worldview is what I take issue with. And that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that there are not areas in their life where they are, not loving people. People are often very complicated, and just because there are areas of their life in which I don't think that they are doing well, doesn't mean that they don't have other areas that in which they are doing well, right? We all have our flaws, and I think it's a healthier approach to not define people on a handful of flaws, but to take that
Yeah.
step back and be like, okay, what's the big picture here, and how can the good parts about them also stamp out the bad parts about them, right? Because I think we all have a divine nature that eventually helps us to become more good.
Mhm. Yeah, no, definitely. No, well put. Yeah, I think we- I think there's so much to say. I think about what's motivating the Heartlanders. It's kind of hard to like. It's kind of hard to say too because we don't have them here, so it's hard to speculate. But
Sure.
I think what the problem I have with their defense is like they see that they're motivated by the facts, let's say, but it's like you said, like you have to have a frame to interpret facts. It's
Yeah,
not
no,
just
nobody's just motivated by the facts, right? Like
yeah.
I hope in 2022 we're not saying that people are objective, right? Like
Oh yeah,
there is not
100%.
a single person who can who's like just the facts, ma'am. Like
Yeah, oh man, yeah. Well, yeah. Um, I totally agree. I think who coined that phrase? Facts don't care about your feelings. Like that's wrong. Like on so many levels.
well, yeah, that was Ben Shapiro, who is
Yeah, Ben
also someone I'm
Shapiro.
I'm not super fond of.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like him to be honest, but like I think he's wrong on that point.
Oh,
um,
yeah.
um, yeah. So I think. Tell me a bit about the Lutheran. Like did you say no Calvinism? You said that
I
they
said
are.
Calvinism. Yeah.
Yes, Calvinism. So like what's the Calvinist component in that? I want to hear about this because that I don't think I heard that before.
Sure. So Calvinism is this form of evangelical Christianity where you believe in predestination. So you believe that God predestines people to be saved or to be go to hell, basically. And it, Puritanism is a type of strict Calvinism, right? And a lot of the Heartlanders, especially the Stoddards who and I will say James Stoddard passed away very recently, and that is very sad, and we should pray for his family.
Mm, for sure.
They did make the movie Nephites in Europe, which
Yeah, I remember
sort
that.
of,
Was that the
yeah,
about the Vikings?
kind of it's kind of a confusing movie. But it's basically about this idea that they think that Nephites were white people, or white Europeans rather,
Yeah.
and that's the descendants of them, right? So
Oh
they'd
man.
say that the Puritans are descendants of the Nephites, and they're
Sure.
descendants of the Puritans, and I think that intersection has been underexplored, and I think that does impact their worldview a lot, and
Yeah.
a lot of what they say is about the Puritan work ethic,
Oh yeah,
and they
yeah.
they 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 refer back to that sort of ideology. So I'm not here to critique Calvinism, although I
Hmm.
will say I'm not
Yeah.
the Calvinist belief that everyone goes to that you can be destined to go to hell, right? I don't believe in a hell, so that
Sure. Yeah.
that's my first issue. Um,
Hmm.
but I do think that also impacts the reading of the Book of Mormon, and that impacts the way that they see these texts. And I'm not sure that it's for the best,
Hmm.
given their other strong nationalistic lens.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That's a good point. Okay. Yeah. I had forgotten that the Puritans were kind of down that vein. So no. Okay. That's very interesting. So I kind of want to switch gears. I mean, I think we're already heading
Sure.
this direction, but so one of the things that I did the last time I read the Book of Mormon through and through, cover to cover, like that was my end goal in doing so, was back in about 2017, and then since then I've been reading other things and cycling through other scripture. Um, but when I read the Book of Mormon in 2017, I looked at it specifically looking for how ideology, um, sort of like what's the role ideology plays in the Book of Mormon. And then when I did that, I discovered like a lot of incredible insights. One of those was the idea of domicide and immigration and how that plays out in the Book of Mormon. But so one of the things that happens in the Book of Mormon and Alma, in the war chapters is, they're confronting the Lamanite army, and they at one point the Lamanite army is given a chance to explain why they're waging war against the Nephites, and they say forthrightly, we're doing this because you know our father's land and kingship and territory was stolen by their brother Nephi, and we're here to claim it back. And then you compare that version of the story with the version Nephi tells, and it's like that's not the same story. And so it's like it's like an ideological difference, like a big one, that's like causing these two tribes to constantly go to war. And I thought that was really like, I thought for me, like especially with my personal study, um, that was really sad to me because again, like Donald Trump had just gotten elected, um, and the nation felt very divided. It still feels very divided, um, and people were disagreeing with each other at levels that, like if you disagreed with a policy, you were then like labeled as like not just like not that just you agree, but you were like morally like abhorrent. You're like you're a terrible person if you disagree with certain policies, or if you voted in a particular way. And to me that's like a very big ideological, like that's a symptom of like being consumed by ideology. And in the Book of Mormon you see that time and time again. People have competing ideologies, and it leads to war, or it leads to um doctrinal debates. Sherem, the Antichrist, I think is a good example of this, where he's operating on a different set of assumptions than, who does he debate? Was it Jacob?
I think so.
Yeah. So and then again, like you start to see that again, kind of what you're saying with like the Heartlanders. It's like you're filtering information through a certain lens, not an ideological lens, not necessarily a political lens, but some type of ideology, and that's informed by like a worldview or a paradigm, some type of ideology. Um, but anyways, my kind of like goal the past few years has been to like to point out where people are being ideological. And I think I hate bringing it back to politics again and again and again, but like but kind of like you said, it's like there can be there's a lot of allusions to social justice and treating people equally in the Book of Mormon. But I think like the social justice left, let's say, kind of approaches their own ethical framework from an ideological stance, and I think there's holes in it. I think that's a problem. But
I can see what you're saying. I just think it's very hard to speak monolithically about
okay, yeah,
the social justice left, and that would be my critique, because I do think, like for I found a lot of people on the left whose social justice embodies compassion, forgiveness, and scriptural principles, and some would dismiss it as too far on the left, but I don't know. I just object to the idea that we can speak about groups so monolithically.
yeah, that's solid.
But I do think that whatever side of the political aisle we're on, we do run risks ideologically of deviating from what our paradigm should be, which is to love God and love our neighbor.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So one of the ways I think you can think about ideology is it's kind of like a desktop icon. It's like there's enough info that you get a gist of what the icon is representing. It's like, oh yeah, that's my photo of my time in Cancun. And then you open the photo, and then like all the pixels fill in the rest of the image, and it's like a smooth image. But the icon itself like is missing a lot of information, and you would never like hold the icon up and say this is the real thing, this is reality itself. um
Sure.
but then so then I when I see people, anyone, this doesn't matter who you are, like I think our understanding of the scriptures in the Book of Mormon and our religion is kind of like the icon, where like we kind of get a gist of what's going on, but then like there's like a lot of info that's missing, and for sure that's not it itself, but it's just like the representation that's useful. um and so um I mean, there. I feel like so when I told my friends I was going to BYU when I transferred, they're like, "Congratulations, man! That's so great. You're gonna love it there. I feel like that's a school for you." I said, "Yeah, it's gonna be awesome." But the one thing is like, there's always drama like every week, and my friends were like, "Yeah, like, that's fine. You love drama. That's for you then." And it's kind of true. Like I love like these culture wars and these
Oh, I
debates.
hate the culture wars.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I love the drama of it, and like and stuff. It's just who I am. But I think a lot of that is caused. It's like by having an incomplete picture of what a religion claims to be. Like I think a lot of people, for example, would say, "How can you say you're a universalist?" You
Sure.
know?
No, they will. They have.
Yeah, and
Yes,
it's like,
yes,
well,
that.
and like I actually kind
Yeah.
of agree with you. Like me too. Like I'm kind of like in that universalist boat. I think our theology is very universalist in like a very lovely way.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think
not only
eternal progression gives way to universalism.
yeah, and not only that, but it's like it's also very just too.
Yep.
When you read Alma 41 and you learn about the law of restoration, where you're going to whatever you put out is going to be returned to you, that to me is like, yeah, you're gonna inherit a degree of glory that you want, and that's just, and because you wanted it, and it's also universalist because like in Mormon theology we don't have a like a hell like everyone else does. It's a different type of hell. It's one that like you impose on yourself.
Yeah,
um
and I think that that's the important part too. And I'm not convinced that hell has to be permanent either. I
mhm.
think with eternal progression, repentance is always possible,
Yeah,
even if it's hard. And because it's imposed on yourself, then you have the opportunity to unimpose it, I think, through
yeah,
Christ's
no,
atonement.
I think so too. I think I can't remember who said it. Someone said something. This is not Mormon theology necessarily, but it was an interesting insight. I think someone said something like, you know, Satan Satan will cease to be Satan the moment he admits that he's wrong, and that's something
Yep.
he's never willing to do.
Well,
Um,
hypothetically never willing to do.
yeah, right. Hypothetically, never willing to do. And to me, that's ideology and dogmatism and like being constricted by like just a very narrow, or not even narrow, but like a worldview that doesn't have room to grow.
Mm.
Um, and so I really like that. It's like, yeah, like we're always learning, we're always coming in contact with new information. Let's be open minded about it, and I think because you never know, maybe our little icons are wrong, right? Like the
Sure.
Lamanites and the Nephites, like it could be, if they had an understanding, arguably they would all get along, right?
That's true.
They wouldn't go to war. So, and I think what's so beautiful about third Nephi, when Christ comes, is he lays down his gospel. It's like from the horse's mouth, and everyone's like, it has a consensus. And then like the only time he formalizes something is so that there's less confusion, there's less bickering about it. And I think that to me that kind of like avoids the legalism. It's like, don't have the rules for the sake of like punishing people, have them for the sake of clarifying things for people. um so I think that's, again, I think the Book of Mormon speaks a lot to having like a broad worldview. Our doctrine is very friendly to that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. With what you're saying about having a broad worldview, I was thinking about how, you know, Christ defines doctrine um in third Nephi as repent and be baptized and follow
Mhm,
me, right? Doctrine is not the set of logical propositions upon which
mhm.
people have to believe in order to come unto Christ. And I think that's because the love of God is a lot more expansive than that. And it's not that I'm saying that truth is unimportant. I don't want to be
Yeah.
mistaken. But what I am saying is that I think it can be very difficult to discern truth from a worldview, which we all have, and that through agape, through charity,
Yeah.
through Christian love, that's when we are able to, speak about others and speak about ourselves in a way that makes, I don't know, us better people and us more loving.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, 100%. Um, I read I recently read Barabbas. Have you read that by
Oh yeah, I have.
yeah, it's such a good book. Highly recommend.
Really good.
Um, but one of the things that I love about that book is, Barabbas is like being pushed around from to and fro, and he's in a mine, he's a slave after the crucifixion of Christ, and he gets like, he has a little slave's disc, and they the slave writes like Jesus's name on it, to signify that he belongs to Christ. And then the Romans kind of like find him and they say like, whose name is this on your disc? And he says, well, it's Christ's. And so he starts asking him about his God, and the slave, not Barabbas, but the other slave he's with, kind of like stumbles through the questions. Like no one can give anyone a satisfactory answer in that book as far as like what people believe and what Christ's doctrine is about. But at the very least, they get to say, like, what's his power predicated on? It's predicated on love. And then the Romans are like really confused, like, what? Love? Like this doesn't make any sense. But but then at the end of the book, it's like like Barabbas sort of recognizes like like God's love for him and how many times he saved him and gotten him out of trouble, gotten him out of execution or judgment, let's say, that he finally like understands like, oh yeah, like this is about love, and now I can. It's kind of ambiguous at the end, but I like to think like at the end he was sincere when he's like, when he says, I give my soul to thee, when he dies. um
Sure.
but it's like I was talking about this in class. It's like the 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 imperative to love others and to forgive them sounds so like, it sounds like the totally wrong answer, um in the conversation of like, how do we make historical wrongs right, and how do we institute justice, social justice. It's like a big component of that, I think, is like to forgive and to love one another. And like I don't see it being any other way, um and that has, for me, that like that there has to be a part of the mix, along with whatever other ideas, but like that, because to me that solves all the problems, like, like that's what makes the other a person and the other a human. It's like that you love them and that Christ loves them. um
Yeah, and just to sort of like end on a thought from that, I've been thinking a lot about Ephesians 4:14, and the verse reads something like, I didn't pull it up, sorry. The
no, you're
verse
good.
reads something like, they're whisked about by every doctrine, and I've had that thought about so many things in life, right? So many times in life we try to define our lives based on something so arbitrary, whether or not we get a college education, whether or not we have a job that we like, how much money we make, and things like that. And I'm not saying that those things are unimportant, because they feel so important in mortality to us, and they are important in terms of our pragmatic function in this world. But I think my faith at least reminds me that that's not eternal. What is eternal is the love that I cultivate for God and the love that I cultivate for other people. And so when I read the Book of Mormon, I try to read it through the lens of, how can this help me gain that eternal perspective, which allows me to be charitable to people, which allows me to forgive when things don't go my way, which allows me to forgive myself for past mistakes and to forgive others for past mistakes too. and to do so freely while still acknowledging that there was a mistake made, right? And I think that that's a healthy perspective to take. And the Book of Mormon, specifically the discourses on charity, are in large part what allow me to do that.
That's awesome. No, that's so beautiful. Yeah, so I think that's all the time we have for today, but thanks so much, Hannah, for coming on. It's always fun to hear, how the Book of Mormon has touched you. I think, this world definitely could stand to love more and forgive more and to be more understanding, have a broader worldview. I think, that's that's the only way forward as far as I can tell. So
Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you so much for having me.
yeah, of course. Thank you. And we'll maybe we'll get to do this again.
Sounds great.
Cool.